And welcome to another episode of Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. My name is Adam from cerebralrevolt.com, and with me here I have my co-host Aaron from ageoftransitions.com. How are you doing, Aaron?
Very good. It's great to be talking to you again, Adam.
Yeah, it's going to be good to talk because it's been a while since we've done one of our Themes and Memes installments. There have been technical problems on both ends of the pond here, and so we've been struggling to put something together, but things have worked out. And so this month we will once again be covering another film. This month's film is called Divergent. I'm not sure how popular it was, or how many people knew about it, or how much interest is sort of I've seen in this film. But it's another teen sort of novel trilogy turned into a movie, very much like The Hunger Games. And there's a few other ones that are out there, isn't it, Aaron?
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely this teen novel trilogy turned into a movie trilogy. Seems to be a trend at the moment. And might there be a reason for this trend? What do you think, Adam? Is there a reason for this?
I think so. I definitely think so. I think it has a lot to do with preparing a younger generation for the type of world that they're going to be living in say, 10, 15, 20 years' time. And as we've referenced this many times in things like the Strategic Trends Report published by the Ministry of Defence in the UK, we reference things like UN Agenda 21, and a whole bunch of different initiatives and plans and reports and predictions and all this kind of stuff, which talk about how the world is basically going to be very, very similar to the portrayals in these films. And so I think this has a lot to do with preparing. I mean, what I'm talking about here is predictive programming, neuro-predictive programming, to use the technical term. But I think this is what it's about getting younger people to accept that is the natural course of, how history is going to play out. This is the natural course of events. This is kind of an inevitable future that we're sort of all charging towards here haphazardly, and getting them to identify with all of those types of ideas. And so, this film is another perfect example of that, in my opinion, and perhaps we'll even devote a show to that very concept itself, Aaron. What do you think about that?
That's a good idea. There certainly are so many themes and memes recurring throughout all media. We're not just talking movies, but all forms of entertainment media. We see the same ideas popping up again and again. And that's fodder for us here on this show. And we are thinking about doing shows that go beyond a single movie review, as we've been doing. They've just been single movie reviews. Today's show is going to be that too. But we're thinking about branching out a little into the future and covering other entertainment media, more themes and memes, always talking about themes and memes.
Yeah, it's all going to be done under the banner of themes and memes, because this is, as you say, exactly what we're going to be talking about. But themes and memes don't just present themselves in films. I mean, they're in all the muses, and not just the muses, but in advertising as well, and in public service announcement and artwork, and everything you see around you. We see common themes and memes, and so this show is obviously about that, and we would like to cover and branch out a bit. In terms of looking at things, perhaps like even albums, in terms of music, and maybe even different types of artwork. But yeah, we could possibly look at doing something on the types of themes and memes that we're going to be touching on tonight. But yeah, that will come down the line. But
something
tonight
to look
again,
forward to.
yeah, something to look forward to. I think it'd be very, very interesting. But yeah, tonight we're going to be looking at Divergent, 2014 film, released I think round about June, maybe. I think June, July, something like that. Yeah. Did you check the director for this film, Aaron? Because I didn't. That was one of the things I missed, actually.
I didn't. I was not good at checking the credits on this one.
Yeah, I didn't look at the credits a lot. Yeah, I can't remember the director's name. I took a few notes, but that was one of the things I missed. So I guess people will have to go and check that out for themselves. But
yeah, we'll link up the IMDb page for all that info on the post for the show. Definitely.
Yeah, we can do that. But yeah, I guess to get into introduction of what the film's about. This is, as I said before, another teen film. Obviously directed at people sort of 9 to 20, something like that. Children and teenagers. Very much like the Hunger Games. And it is, if you wanted to summarize the film, you could basically say that it was basically just the Hunger Games meets Brave New World. Because it's if you took those two novels and made them into a film, this is pretty much what you'd get. Is Divergent. But it also has some other sort of interesting twists to it in terms of the political flavor in the film and how that is actually slightly different to the most of these types of sort of future dystopian films that we're seeing. And so perhaps we can talk about that later on. But yeah, I mean, where should we start here, Aaron? Should we provide a sort of a brief outline of the beginning of the plot, or?
Probably, yeah. I'll just say real quickly that I'm kind of surprised at the depth of the ideas. It was really good. It presents a lot of good ideas in the film, but of course, along with that, you get this sort of corny teen movie sort of things they just have to throw in to pander to the audience. So it's a little bit of back and forth on it, but it was a decent movie altogether, I guess.
Yeah, it was a decent movie. It was watchable. I mean, obviously we have a lot of things, themes and memes in the film and concepts that were very interesting. But then, of course, we just have these moments of like all-out teeny bop ridiculousness, where it's just, it's just like this kind of really sort of bubblegum pop music and the girl kissing the guy and and under the sunset and just all that kind of stuff that know that.
One thing that pops out to me is the group called we'll get into this later. The group called Dauntless. Their depiction was like this guys running around. We'll get into that later. Just give us a synopsis out of it and let us know what this is all about.
Yeah. Sure. So the film starts out with a sort of a monologue from the protagonist, a girl called Beatrice, and she's basically explaining the fact that so I think somewhere around 100 years ago or something, there was a huge, Third World War. Where have we seen that meme? But it's set in the sort of the aftermath of some global crisis, where a much smaller percentage of the population still in existence. And she talks about the fact that the founders of the new system, the founders of the post-war system, basically decided that the only way to ensure peace was to divide society up into factions, according to their psychological profiling. And it's a bit of a nuanced thing, because in this particular scenario, you're tested psychologically for your propensity towards a certain, say, personality profile and certain characteristics and strengths rather. But at the same time, you're also given the opportunity to choose which particular faction you join. And I think it's upon reaching 18 years old, you grow up, with your parents and whatever faction they were part of. And then once you're 18, you go through an initiation ceremony, and you get tested for what your sort of, particular psychological profile is. And then after that, you go to another ceremony and you get to choose which faction you want to join. And they all have a big sort of chanting thing where they swear, they utter their allegiance, faction before blood, faction before blood. So they have to separate from their families when they join the faction. But yeah, that's kind of the opening premise of the film is just this protagonist, young girl, sort of explaining how the system works, and it's following her into her sort of the beginnings of her initiation sort of ceremony and process, and choosing which faction she's going to be with for the rest of her life.
Yes, it's this division of labor concept into 5 basic categories throughout all of society. I found this very interesting in that, you get the free choice aspect of things going on here. The children are able to pick wherever they go, but it's a very limited choice. And then once they pick that one choice, they're stuck with it completely for the whole of their life. So how much free choice is that really? And certainly we have this sort of reflecting, to me, I thought of higher education in our Western world today, where you go to college to figure out what you do, and then what you do is this sort of specific job, and that's what you are for the rest of your life. That made me think of that.
Yeah, definitely some parallels there with the education system, especially the higher education system, and how you're sort of encouraged to become highly specialized in one very specific area and just remain in that area for the rest of your life. That's kind of the ideal career path, that's presented to us. So yeah, sort of definitely a parallel there. But basically, the society is divided up into 5 factions. One of the factions is called erudite, and they are the kind of the intelligentsia and the scientists. So they're the kind of the elitists in some way. Obviously, it's not overtly presented as them at the beginning as being better than anybody else per se, but they're the scientists, they're the intelligent ones, they're the people who figure things out. They sort of the academics and the advisors, and then you've got the group called amity, and they are the sort of the basically based in agriculture. They're all farmers. They live very simple lives on the land. They provide, presumably, most of the food stocks and things like that. And they're sort of known for being very kind and very sort of charitable. You then have another faction called candor. Basically, they are the ones who are in charge of the governing body. They apparently value honesty and order, and all those types of virtues. They're supposed to be very, very measured, very unemotional, very exacting.
Yeah, they were like lawyers or something like that. They were a specific part of the ruling. Not because there's another caste, abnegation, that runs sort of the bureaucracy and those sorts of elements of the government too. So I'm not exactly sure of the difference there.
You're right. There was a bit of a sort of an indistinction there because, as you say, another one of the factions is called abnegation, which they once again very simple lives. They sort of, it's kind of like amity in a way. They're sort of very charitable. They're very kind. They like to feed the poor. They're sort of very altruistic and humble.
Selfless.
Very selfless, but they've also got some kind of relationship with candor, and the fact that they have somehow got some sort of say in the allocation of resources and certain, bureaucratic duties, as you said. So it's not quite clear there what the relationship is, but the sort of the candor and the abnegation sort of seem to sort of have some influence in the governing structure of the society. But the final faction is the premiere, the premiere faction of the film. Called Dauntless, and of course they're basically the police and the military, and the protectors, and basically they live like anarchists. When I say anarchists, I mean in the traditionally conceived version of what anarchy means. In terms of people living wild lives, lawlessness, unruliness. They all live in some sort of abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, and they're always running around dressed in black and jumping over buildings and doing all kinds of daredevil stunts, and doing the sort of things that some paramilitary group would be doing.
They're the warrior class, and they themselves,
the warrior class.
They appear to have a life without rules, and they do what they please, and yet they're the ones in charge of upholding the law. They're the police officers, more or less, going on here. And as I was talking before, like the kind of corny depiction of Dauntless, they're all running around, and they wear cut-off sleeve shirts or jumping off of trains. Like, it's just, I thought that was like incredibly silly, like them like hooting and hollering, running around. I was just laughing at that myself. But It's an interesting idea, this warrior class idea, certainly.
Yeah. I think all like the craziness and the unruly behavior and running around and jumping off buildings and going on zip wires and all that kind of stuff is just another one of these things that they've put into the film to really sort of like and engage the sort of the teenagers, because it's it's very very rebellious. Is what they're doing is very rebellious. Yes. It's very free. It's very unrestricted. They're all yelling and screaming and shouting and laughing as they're doing what they're doing. And so it's obviously meant to appeal to a younger rebellious sort of demographic, sort of teenagers and stuff like that. So
no doubt.
It's what about did you pick up on the different elements and symbols that were attributed to each of these factions? Because that was something that was quite interesting.
Yes, it did have a very occult, elemental sort of thing going on. We've got 5 factions, so I guess 5 would be the 4 elements plus the 5th element. You can see the elements that way. The 5th element sort of being the higher spiritual one that ties them all together, the quintessence element that goes above and beyond, but goes through all the other 4 elements. There was an eye incorporated into erudite, the scientist class.
Right. The all-seeing eye.
Was there fire in Dauntless? Fire, right?
I got a list of them here actually. So it's actually quite hard. If you watch the film, it's very, very hard. There's like a few scenes where you have to pause it and take notes because they're very brief. But basically, I've managed to do that. And so with erudite, the intelligentsia, you've got the all-seeing eye. It's just a picture of one eye. Very, very common, very, very well-known established meme in conspiracy culture, of course. And then in abnegation, you've got a picture of one hand clasping another, almost as if in a handshake, but it's kind of one person helping another person up. It's like someone being helpful. They're sort of lifting you up and helping you.
That could be reminiscent of the death and rebirth ritual, where one person lifts the other person back up to life from the ground, rised up to standing. That's part of initiation ritual, so that could be the case.
Yeah. If you look at the way the hands are clasped and that, it almost looks like it doesn't look like a regular handshake or regular grip. It looks like almost something a bit different. I'm not sure if it's a Masonic handshake, but something a bit different. But anyway, you've got the amity, the farmer, is the one that lives on the land in a very sort of again very altruistic, selfless, charitable, etc. They're symbolized by a tree, so they're sort of nature, I guess. Pastoral, yes, very much. And then you've got Candor, where the group that's supposedly run the government, or at least in charge of a lot of the decision making. They have the scales of justice, so it's like the typical scales that you see in any statue or any sort of symbol outside a courtroom. In England it's the sword and the scales, but in other places it's just the scales.
Balance,
to do with
truth.
Balance, balance, truth, being measured, being sort of unbiased, unemotional, being very sort of analytical and whatnot. And of course, Dauntless is fire. Passion, it can be anger, it can be enthusiasm, it can be energy. And there's many other sort of occult interpretations of
blood.
The soul, the blood,
burning desire, all that kind of the courage, Leo, the lion, courage, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, so I mean, we could we could probably go on forever listing all the kind of the attributes related to fire and the mystery traditions, but anyway, those are basically the symbols that are attributed to each and that represent each of the factions. And so I found that very interesting. And there's also kind of a little tie-in at the beginning as well when they're in that initiation ritual. Where they're doing it in front of in front of their families, in front of a big crowd, and sort of a council type situation. All the young kids are coming forward, and what they have to do to basically pledge allegiance to whichever faction they've decided to join is cut their hand with a knife, and then let a drop of blood fall into one of 5 little pools, and each pool has a different thing. You've got water, you've got gravel, you've got some stones, and you've got some hot embers, and there's something else. I couldn't pick out all of those things, but they've obviously once again have decided to link each of these factions and each of the things that they symbolize with some sort of earthly element or some sort of energy or concept, so that they've brought that out there too.
Yep, charged with occult significance, of course, and this is, it's all borrowed from occult initiation rituals. It certainly is initiation ritual, as is college graduation in our day, and that's somewhat the equivalent, as we were kind of talking about before. There is an initiation to the next degree of your life, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, 18 is generally when I'm not exactly sure how it works in America, but 18 is generally a transition point between lower and higher education. And so I think this is when they do this as well in the film at the age of 18. But to get to the crux of where the plot is going in this film, what happens, and this ties directly into the title of the film, is that this society is based on the presumption that all people in society have a psychological predilection of one form or another, where they are definitely best suited to being one thing or another, and that they should fit categorically, definitively into one of these 5 categories. But what happens is this protagonist, Beatrice, goes and gets her psychological testing done with they inject her with drugs, and she goes into some sort of altered state dream world and has to face her fears or whatever, something like that. And basically, when she's finished this experience, the person who's the clinician or the doctor or whoever's doing it basically gets all sort of flustered and upset and starts to panic and goes, "Oh, you got to get out of here quickly! You got to get out of here!" And she says, your test results are inconclusive. You're a divergent. But you don't fit into any one of these categories. It's basically sort of infers that this kind of thing has been known to happen, but it's very rare. And then if the government finds out about it, it basically would tear away at the very founding tenets of the society, and they'd actually, for that reason, want to come and probably kill you or get rid of you somehow or whatever. And just don't tell anyone about this. Just just say that you got your natural test results because she was an abrogation. Just tell your parents that you were an abrogate and you tested positive as an abrogate, and just go and join abrogation and just pretend this never happened, basically. And so, that's kind of where the main premise of this whole film starts off, is when she's discovered to be a divergent.
Yeah, she's trouble. She's a live one, as I like to say.
Yeah, alive. Yeah, exactly. They got a live one.
Yeah, look out.
Look out.
This is certainly an interesting topic because it, again, the premise is a society that divides labor up into very specific classes, specific sections, and it more or less forces you to fit into one of those sections completely and utterly, so that you're not a well-rounded individual. You're actually a very narrow-minded individual by design. And the struggle is to break free from that. And it's also about the natural human inclination to be more than just a narrowly defined thing. You can't really do that properly.
Yeah, that's right. This is it's a weird sort of dialectic that's played out in the film here, because in one way, I think what they're trying to do is in many ways acclimate people to some kind of caste system, especially the younger generations, but they're also promoting the heroes in this film, the protagonists, the people who are supposed to identify with, the people who are supposed to like, as being above that system, as being not particularly prone to one personality type, as being divergent from them all, and as being as being sort of, I don't know what you call them, a polymath or whatever, as being a well-rounded person, and there's even a bit of dialogue at the end, near the end of the film anyway, where the girl, there's a romance going on, and she speaks to the guy, and he admits that he was a divergent too, and and he's got tattoos on his back of all 5 of the different factions, and he explains to her that I want to be smart and intelligent, and I also want to be charitable and altruistic, and I also want to be kind and humble, but I also want to be courageous, and and strong, and I also want to be fair and just, and so he's basically he's listing off all the different attributes of all the different factions, and sort of saying that he wants to embody all of those things, and so bit of a dichotomy there in the film, and it sort of ties into the ambiguous sort of political flavor of this film, at least in comparison to so many other films that we're seeing like this.
Yeah, I guess this is another example of a revolutionary theme, certainly at least a little bit here, in that a dictatorship, a dystopian dictatorship is quite clear in the way the story is presented. They make no confusion there. It's easy for anybody watching the film to see. And then the rebels are the ones who are caught within it, who are in the right. They're the ones who are trying to make things right, but they can't because they're up against a corrupt system. So not that a revolution actually occurs, at least in this first film, certainly, but we've got some of the revolutionary idea being thrown around there, don't you think, Adam?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because this is this is one of the other things that's explained in the sort of the introductory monologue in the film. Is she explains that there are divergents in the system. There are people that don't fit into any category, and these people are basically just the homeless. They're the people that don't fit into any faction.
Oh, yeah, the factionless are the homeless. That's
the
right.
Factionless, yeah, and the factionless are divergents, or people that have basically, if they're not divergents, they're people who have failed to perform, their duties in their faction for some reason and have been kicked out or had to leave. But anyway, some of the groups, the kinder ones like the amity and the abnegation, will sometimes take these people into shelter and to support them and try and help them, but for the most part they're outcast in society. So the people that are actually the most intelligent are the ones that are basically outcast and minimized and disenfranchised by society at large. And there's this kind of a weird sort of political, I don't know, vibe to the whole film in terms of the fact that, as you say, it is in some ways very, very authoritarian, and the fact that, society is regimented into these 5 factions, and they all sort of chant these, religious mantras about their factions, and, people are totally committed to the cause, yet there is kind of an almost like an underground in some ways of people who realize that this system isn't working, that there are people who don't fit into it, and these people are slipping through the cracks, and if we are such a great society, then why have we got these problems with these divergents, and is this whole sort of scientific theory of the caste system actually valid at all? And so there's you've got sort of both of those ideas running in parallel throughout the film, and they kind of lead into, I suppose, the climax of the film in many ways. But I guess we can kind of get to that later on in terms of the plot sequence.
Sure. Well, any given system of government is going to be prone to some form of problem or some sort of corruption, one or another. And this system, it's not hard to see how the corruption can eke its way in. And as the movie progresses, we see certain factions vying for power. Certainly, you get the erudite scientist class coming in and wanting to set up a scientific dictatorship is what occurs. So, so what is a questionable form of society to begin with? What is freedom really? Or do these children really have freedom of choice? What is picking one thing to be your entire life? Is that really freedom? It goes to the next level in that you've got this scientific class wanting to take that system to its furthest reaches and kind of like perfecting it in a way and making it a complete scientific dictatorship.
That's right. Well, because you've got the this is something that sort of becomes more and more apparent throughout the film, and that leads into the ultimate sort of climax and conclusion of the film, is the erudite class, headed by Kate Winslet. I've forgotten the name of the character she plays, but anyway, she's kind of the seems to be the head of that group, or in some way, she's. It becomes apparent that she's been making these kind of covert visits with a whole bunch of government vehicles and supplies and stuff to the Dauntless headquarters, and basically, sort of supplying. She's building up some kind of, she's preparing for some kind of conflict, and because she's, supplying with all these resources and all this kind of stuff. And
a close relationship's being built between erudite and Dauntless. So the scientific class and the warrior class. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it. What we've got is the scientific class. There's been some, in this the setting of the society, there's been some kind of conflict and disagreement over the allocation of resources, and some of the other factions have accused abnegation, who have apparently have got control over the how resources are distributed and such, of basically hoarding things and not being fair, and so basically given the impression that people are kind of fed up of abnegation. And for that reason, the erudite class start what is sort of basically a gradual takeover of the system. Ultimately leading into a coup.
You know what's interesting? They actually break out scandals too, and scandalous news stories. Like some member of abnegation is like a wife beater or something like that.
What he beat his child actually.
Yeah,
there you go.
He's actually,
there's a direct tie in there, and I noticed that as well. That was it's like political typical political mudslinging. Whenever there's kind of some contentious political issue coming up, one side will just try and throw mud at the other and see what sticks, and try and bring them down in some way. And so it's very 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 familiar, all that stuff. Yeah. But yeah, that's what we've got is the story follows this girl, being initiated into the Dauntless crew, the sort of that faction, and living the wild lifestyle, being trained in sort of hand-to-hand combat and military tactics, and doing all these kind of simulation drills. And she gets all, sort of all, I don't know, she gets all trained up. She's all tough, she's got a black suit on, and she's one of them. And she goes through, as I said, so many of these different rituals they put her through, a lot of which are to do with pure fear. And that's another thing we talked about recently in a different conversation, you and I, Aaron, about the concept of secret societies, or societies in general, fraternal orders, whatever, using an initiation ritual that is designed to either scare you to death or make you think that you're going to die because it's so scary.
Yeah,
right.
That certain psychological effect is aroused, and from there you can lead the ritual further or what have you. But yeah, we were talking about that on Tom Secker's fine program Clandestine, so folks should check out that if they haven't listened to that yet.
Yeah, we should probably plug that one there because it was a really good one. We interviewed the film The Conspiracy, so go to Tom Secker's website and check that one out. But but anyway, so we've got this girl going through her various initiation rituals, getting tougher, and she's kind of falling behind at the beginning, but then she really makes a concerted effort, and she falls into the favor of the typical love interest, the handsome young guy with the chiseled features and all the rest of it.
Again, typical teen movie. Yeah,
really annoying.
They can't help themselves; they have to do it.
They got to sell a film. But as far as their sort of blossoming relationship slowly, him beginning to sort of develop a soft spot. Her and her becoming stronger, and she eventually succeeds and passes all the initiation stages and is accepted fully into the Dauntless faction. Shortly after which point, she is approached by her mother, and basically her mother basically comes and finds her sort of in a covert, secretive way. She sort of pulls her aside when she's in public one day because members are not supposed to talk to their own family once they've joined a faction. They can't go back. And the mother basically says to her, she's figured out by this stage that, you're a divergent, weren't you? And she admits to her, yes, she says, you've got to be so careful. You've got to, make sure you can't let them know, because this erudite group, not only are they sort of coming into Dauntless with like supplies and sort of building a relationship with them, but they're also looking for divergence, because obviously, this character I referred to, the Kate Winslet character is she's almost like she kind of reminds me of the character in Elysium, the Jodie Foster character. There's this very, very tough woman, who's got this very
analytical in her thought process, very dictatorial.
Dictatorial, absolutely committed to the cause, with absolute conviction, and she even says that at one point, I'm willing to die for my ideals. And I mean, she there's a number of interesting pieces of dialogue where she says things like, human nature is the enemy, and independent choice is the enemy, and we must eradicate these things to have a free, functioning, peaceful society. And so, this is what we see is her beginning to form this relationship with the Dauntless faction, them being the warrior class, in order to effect some kind of takeover. And this is where the film basically builds to, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The relationship between the scientific class and the warrior class. And as you're saying, the leader of the erudite scientist class there is spouting off some things against pitting human nature as the big problem, and all just the typical stuff you hear from your favorite transhumanists, saying that human nature is flawed and it has to be changed. If it's not, we will digress into some sort of terrible situation. If we do go about redesigning human nature and getting rid of all its problems, then we're gonna a utopia is in view for if we go down that path. And the technocracy is the way forward. And what better tool to enforce this plan of action than the warrior class? If you can somehow get them on your side, they are the enforcers. So why don't you just get them right in line with your technocratic ideals there? Get things rolling.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting part about this is although the warrior class, ostensibly, they're committed to taking orders. They pledge allegiance to whichever legitimate ruling body happens to exist at the time. So, whoever wants them to go and do something, go and arrest this person or shoot that person, they've got to do it. However, in erudite, in terms of their wanting to, effect a coup and take over the government and take out basically candor and abnegation. What they have to do is actually use a basic form of mind control on the Dauntless faction to do so. And so they come in one night with these drugs, and basically what they do is to tell all the Dauntless members, right? Well, we're about to go on a mission here, but we've got to put tracking chips in you before you go on this mission for safety reasons. But what it really is actually a truth serum, or a suggestibility type drug. And so all the Dauntless members. Basically injected with this drug, which makes them completely suggestible and makes them links all their brains up to some sort of centralized computer system, so that they're kind of operating in a hive mind type situation. They're walking around sort of like zombies, just taking orders from some computer somewhere somehow. The technology isn't explained really, but I mean that's the basic premise we've got here. Is they're injected with something that turns them into zombies, and they take orders from a central computer, which has been set up by Erudite in Dauntless headquarters there, and that's how this sort of coup comes about. But because certain people, such as the protagonist and her love interest, happen to be divergents, this drug doesn't work on them. And so they go out into society with the rest of all these zombies, having to pretend as if they are zombies when actually they're still retaining their independent thought, and begin this, basically like a martial law situation where the Dauntless are going around arresting pretty much everyone. I think
they're going after specifically abnegation, the selfless governing class, because again they're the ones in charge of the government at the moment, and Erudite wants to become in charge of the government because set up their technocracy. They have to get rid of first they discredited abnegation and made them look bad, and then they just all out take them out. That's what this part is.
Yeah, that's you're right. Actually, I remember now they marched specifically towards the part of town where abnegation, rather than just arresting everyone. It's just they all sort of march towards there, and they're literally pulling people out of their houses, getting them down their knees, and of course, like any Hollywood movie, it all leads up to a sort of a last-minute climax where, the Dauntless rather have got all the abnegates sitting down on their knees, crying, about to be shot in the head. They've got their guns out, they're ready to pull the trigger, and the leading protagonist managed to break into the control center and kill the Erudite leader, well, actually, no, she doesn't kill her. She injects her with the truth serum, the suggestibility serum, and then tells her to, switch the program down and stop all this madness. And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
So another cheesy,
very silly
Hollywood ending.
Very silly. Yeah.
How many times have we seen this?
Yeah. It was all the ideas in between, though. It wasn't like the way that the movie, that sort of silliness. Yeah. But there were tons of ideas which are interesting. I mean, we have, in essence, transhuman army of super soldiers carrying out an evil technocratic plot to overthrow the government here. It's a pretty interesting idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what it is at its core. It's a kind of a transhuman, like you say, a transhumanist paramilitary force, who are all under mind control in some kind of hive mind system, being controlled by a bunch of technocrats, a bunch of the intelligentsia. People in white coats and offices and whatnot, and computer systems and stuff like that. I mean, it's such a this meme has been trotted out so many times in so many films.
Well, it's accurate though, because it's sort of it's the military-industrial complex. You've got the scientific class, all the companies like the Raytheons and the Boeings and their employees, all those sorts of that whole system, that would be the erudite class, I would say. And then you've got the warrior class being the military. That's where the hardware that's built by the scientific class is put to use. So that's what the military-industrial complex is. It's those two sections of society working in tandem.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I mean, obviously, when I was sort of talking there, I was just saying that we've seen this meme so many times. It's such a typical Hollywood ending. But as you say, it's very, very true. I mean, this is a direct reflection of the power structure that we have in the world today, with an intelligentsia, with people like academics, in universities and various sort of corporate think tanks and military think tanks coming up with strategy and policy. Having very, very strong convictions in what they're doing, and then basically using the warrior class, the military-industrial complex, all its soldiers and all its technology to do their bidding for them. Is essentially what we've got going on here. I mean, obviously it's much more complex than that, and there are many other groups involved in different parts of the agenda. But I mean, this is what we're seeing in this film is very much a reflection of what's happening now, and I think what we're going to see more and more of in the future in terms of how much more overt this stuff gets. I was again, it was kind of a pleasant surprise on the ideas that are put in there, ideas I actually agree with and I think are poignant. It makes some of those, and then it raises a lot of questions too. You get the revolutionary idea, and were the filmmakers trying to present these concepts to the audience, which is a young audience? Why were they presenting them with these ideas? Was it to just prepare them for the future? Was it to prepare them to rebel against a real life system, which is indeed corrupt? Are they trying to carry that out? And if that is the case with the filmmakers here, then who are the filmmakers and what are they doing? And questions like this inevitably arise. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with this film. It's kind of ambiguous as to exactly what side of the spectrum or what side of the debate they're really pushing here. It's because we've, in one sense, we're kind of, in some subtle ways, it's kind of led to believe that this kind of caste system is functional in some ways. It's not like absolute horror, put it that way, like some of the other science fiction or dystopian films, but at the same time we're also especially the younger audience who this is directed at, they're goaded heavily into identifying with these divergent protagonists. They're goaded into identifying with the non-conformists, although they're very much conformist in some way because they have their little factions and they all act like one another within their factions. At the same time, it's kind of promoting the idea that it's like that line I referenced before, where the sort of the male co-protagonist or the male whatever is talking about the fact that he's got tattoos of all the different factions and he wants to represent the best parts of all of them. He doesn't want to be categorized as any one thing. And so there's kind of a weird dichotomy, and at the same time you've also got the fact that there's sort of the way they present the whole concept of revolution. I mean, I suppose it's more like a coup d'état, but it's I don't know about that. It's strange. Are they preparing people for revolution? Are they saying revolution's so something to be avoided? I mean, what's going on here? Yeah,
is it a warning against technocracy and scientific dictatorship that could happen in the real world? I mean, clearly we get the erudite class as being evil here in this movie. That's plain and simple. We can see that. The scientists, which are in the movie, the public, the general public, kind of see them as the smart ones. And they're smart and they know everything. And they're their brains are so great. And that sort of general opinion of the scientific class, I would say, is the general opinion in modern day. That's how people think. They're like, scientists are smart. Yeah. They know a lot of things.
They're smarter. Yeah.
They're more smart.
They're more smarter. Yeah. It's just the worship of the new white-coated priesthood, as some people have described it. It's like you tag the word science into anything these days, and people just go, okay, it must be true. You could say it's like Bertrand Russell in some of his books talked about the fact that with enough conditioning and with enough programming, you can convince a child, but before the age of 10, that snow is black. The sky was black, or whatever. You
2 plus 2 is 5, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, 2 plus 2 is 5, all that kind of stuff, and it's.
Again, this is a perfect example of a real condition in our modern day world, and this film really breaks out a lot of them. I gotta say, that's what impressed me, is that they pull out a lot of poignant ideas.
Yeah, lots of poignant ideas in this film. Lots of things that relate to the society that we're currently living in many ways, and the type of society that we seem to be moving into. If we were to go by the reports and the predictions of all the big think tanks and military-industrial organizations and whatnot, And again, we get back to the question of, why are these films being put out? And they're very much like films like The Hunger Games. We've got this sort of dystopian future. I mean, that's kind of different in that film because it's a very, very dichotomized society. You've literally got the super rich elite, and then you've just got the absolute subsistence dwellers. You've got people living in absolute poverty and ruin who can't even feed themselves and who are starving, dying of disease, and living in shacks and all the rest of it, versus the people living in these sort of enclosed cities, just living absolutely indulgent lifestyles. Whereas this film's a bit different. You sort of got you've got a caste system which is kind of graded in terms of the lifestyle you lead.
What's interesting? It just occurred to me is that all of these teen trilogy novels turned into movies have a heroine. It's a female character. Yeah, that is the lead character.
Yeah, that's one thing that I found very interesting because. It kind of ties into a lot of other films as well, because this is something we're seeing in many other Hollywood films. Is the hero is actually a female now, in so many films. I mean, she's the one kicking all the ass. She's the one with the machine gun. She's the one doing all the crazy hand-to-hand combat stuff, and she's the tough one. She's all dressed in black and whatnot, and she's the one that's the smartest one. And I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it is kind of a role reversal in many ways. And this is something we see in so many films now, including this one. Is the tough female, and we're also seeing a lot more sort of violence, which you wouldn't see in other films, like women fighting women and men fighting women as well, like women being beat up men. I mean, we actually see this in this film. This is a film directed at young people where a girl is getting the crap kicked out of her by a really well-trained guy.
You would never see that in a film 15 years ago. It would be it'd be unacceptable to put that in there.
It would be unacceptable in like an R18 film 10 years ago.
It'd be unacceptable in like an R-rated film almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's amazing how people can be upgraded and how they adapt and conditioned to accept basically what you might call a loss of morality and a general sort of debauchery and debasement. I mean, I'm not saying that women shouldn't be able to stand up for themselves and they shouldn't be able to know a bit of martial arts or know how to protect themselves or have a bit of strength and a bit of courage, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I mean, what we're seeing here is a complete role reversal where the violence has gotten more extreme, and not only that, but it's now the females committing it, and it's also males committing it upon females, which is
and it's shown as kind of like a normal, just everyday thing. Like, a guy fighting a girl. You've seen this in Street Fighter 2. You've played it out so many times. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. anyone who watches the UFC now will know that the women's fighting is coming in big time. That was sort of controversial to start with, but that's totally acceptable now.
Yeah, this is a meme worthy of investigation without a doubt, and it's one that I hadn't really thought of until we just talked now. Very interesting.
I've been thinking about this for a long time, especially since we saw films like. I can't remember. What was that film that came out? It had Gina Carano. She's actually a legitimate MMA fighter, women's MMA fighter. She was a champion for a while, but she turned to acting. You know what? We'll have to maybe.
Was it The Machine? It wasn't that, was it?
It wasn't The Machine. It's one where she plays like a secret agent, and she basically has all of her agency go against her and trying to kill her and trying to take her down. The name will come back to me later, but basically it's another one of these films where the female's all dressed in black. She's constantly beating up guys and getting in fights, and there's just some really quite amazing scenes in that film where you see just a complete role reversal, where a film would show a man in a nice suit and a tuxedo and a woman in a sort of all the fancy clothes, having a good time and having a romantic night out, but instead they're actually trying to kill each other, and there's blood, and it's just like.
Oh, is that Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Brangelina?
No, that was. I mean, it's not that, but I think that was the film that kicked all this stuff off. Yeah. I mean, that was the first film of this nature. Maybe Kill Bill might have been beforehand.
Kill Bill, yeah.
Kill Bill was another one, but yeah, we're seeing this in so many films, and this is just another perfect example of this kind of role reversal that we're seeing here, and sort of conditioning young women to think that they've got to be more masculine rather than feminine, and that needs to be really scrutinized. I think.
You know what? On sort of an occult interpretation of the theme and the plot here.
I see where you're going here.
You see where I'm going? Okay.
Yeah. Well. Go on.
I think what the movie's presenting us with is sort of a left brain, analytical, scientific, typically male is the left brain. It's equated with that system, right? Or at least one that's trying to take over left brain technocracy. It's a left brain thing. And then to combat that, you would need the opposite side, right? The right side, which is more feminine. So
feeling, intuition, emotion.
Yeah. But and yet the female has to take on aspects of the male to kind of get anywhere too.
And of course, this ties into some of the rhetoric that we're seeing coming out of the feminist movements. I think the more radical fringes of the feminist movement, no doubt, but nonetheless, they're saying things like, we don't need men anymore. Now that we've got things like IVF, we need to just create ourselves a big sperm bank, and we can get rid of all the males.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
Radical feminism is the absolute worst, and the most transhumanist group you probably find out there too. The darkest side of the transhuman idea is sort of championed by the radical feminists. Man, they get bad.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, they get really bad. Like, okay, if the man's not willing to, have the baby transplanted into his own stomach and then get rid of him altogether. That's kind of their reasoning there. And I mean, some of the stuff.
I always think of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Junior when I think of that sort of stuff, and pops into mind. That sort of weird movie.
Yeah, the one where he's carrying a baby. That's
so bizarre. So bizarre.
Very, very bizarre.
Well, it didn't make sense at the time, but it's starting to make sense now when we think about things in retrospect, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep, being prepared for what was to come. A generation ago, 20 years ago, however long ago.
20 years ago sounds just about right for that film. Yeah.
It sounds like, from memory, that was an early 90s film, so about right. And there's so many other areas you can look into, too, where you can look at the stuff that's going on now, and you just see little glimpses of it in films that came out in the early 90s, specifically the early 90s, and you can just see this is so obviously preparing, probably our generation, most of all generations, people who are sort of young, children of that age who are completely, more or less uncritical and indiscriminate in terms of what they watch, just taking all these ideas and completely subconsciously. And so that, when these changes and when these, occurrences do start to happen in the real world around us, we just accept them as being normal because we've been conditioned to think that that's the inevitable course that society must follow. And that, ties right back into what we're talking about here with these films. The Divergent and the Hunger Games, and what was the other one? There's another one, I'm sure.
The novel series is the Twilight novels. It's a
Yeah.
little bit different than these two, but it's still the trilogy novel with a female character and all that stuff.
Yeah, trilogy novel, female character, lots of violence. Usually some kind of love triangle scenario, like the Hunger Games, where she likes him, but he likes her, but she doesn't like him, and blah 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 blah.
That's the stuff that young girls just eat up.
Yeah, they love that stuff because they're often in the same situation themselves at school.
Yeah.
They can't make up their mind between John or Jim or Mark or whoever he is.
Yeah.
That's the issue for them. That's the kind of the focus of their life is which guy to choose. And so these films really are going to pull on their heartstrings,
Mm-hmm. Because there are, at the end of the day, men and women and boys and girls they have certain inclinations. And it's important to remember that that's the case. And I don't know if with this sort of like mixture of the sexes sort of thing that's happening, if the idea is sort of to make people believe that there is no difference between them.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know if...
I think that is it. I do.
Yeah.
I really do.
It's just not true, though. I mean, there's a difference.
It's so insane. I mean, I struggle to understand how people can possibly believe this, but I think it's just purely an issue of just constant conditioning through the media, and people are conditioned to believe that, well, if you're trendy, if you're progressive, if you're a nice person, if you're a charitable, empathetic person who wants the best for everybody and not just yourself, then you'll go along with these ideas, and it's all about your humanity. That's how it's kind of pitched to you. Like you're not a good human being if you don't support these ideas, and these ideas are coming from every angle now. We're basically being, Sorry.
I was just going to say the equality label is taken to its ridiculous ends, like where everything is equal. And you just
we're
take
going to
that.
be the same.
Yeah.
That's not the world we live in. Women are different from men. They have different brain chemistry. They have different biology. They carry children. We don't. They've got completely different set of chemicals in their body. Their brains function differently, and that's great because it's complementary. That's what makes the human race survive.
Yeah, there's a different way to measure equality. It's not sameness. It's just equal in virtues, or they may be different virtues, but the sum total of the importance of those virtues is equal. Like a man is equally important to a woman. What he's going to do is different than what she's going to do, but so what? That's how it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is. That's how it's always been, and we're being conditioned from every angle to believe that that's not the case, and that there are no actual differences between men and women, and the fact that we have supposedly had differences is purely a matter of societal conditioning. It's purely it's not a case of nature, but a case of nurture. It's if we hadn't had the psychological conditioning, then a woman she might be as manly as the most masculine man you never find. That whole premise is being trotted out over and over again, and so I think a lot of these films, we've got the female protagonist who's playing the kind of the tough person, the savior, the hero, the warrior. I think it's generally trying to introduce that type of thinking and that type of idea to a younger generation.
So that's something for everyone to think about, and certainly maybe one of the darker aspects of this film. It presents good ideas, but also presents questionable material such as that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of interesting stuff. It's hard to say exactly what they're saying, but I think generally what we're talking about here in this film is just the illustration of a whole bunch of ideas that are important for young people to at least start thinking about and start accepting on some subconscious level. The moral spin that is attributed to each of these ideas is sometimes not clear. But the fact that they're being presented and the fact that the audience is beginning to think about them means that they're being psychologically preconditioned to accept a world where these ideas will be much more prevalent. And I think that's what these films are all about. Yeah,
you're right there. No matter what way you slice this thing, it's a set of certain ideas, and they're presented as, as that's the way the world is. And it's certainly a lot of them are quite poignant, as we were pointing out. Like, the world is a bit like this right now, and we're going into a world where more of the ideas will become even more normalized and commonplace. So, it raises a question of where exactly we're going.
Yeah, I mean, of course, in this film, there's a slight, well, not a slight, but an obvious emphasis, but on the fact that to be divergent, to not fit into a category, to be beyond factions is the preferable way to exist. I mean, these people are presented as being smarter. They put her through a series of tests, and she's able to sort of pass the test so much quicker than everybody else. And
because she sees the easy way to do things, where everybody else is blind to just the simple truth of she's in a dream. She sees the simulation for what it really is, a simulation, where everybody else just takes it as the dream is normal. And that's certainly got tons of occult significance.
Oh, yeah, tons of occult significance there. I mean, she's able to, as you say, everybody else tries to use force. They try to fight it. They try to do logical left brain. They're trying to find logical left brain solutions to the problem, whereas her answer to the problem is merely to step out of it completely, is to admit that it's only an illusion. I don't have to even partake in this,
Yeah.
And, the solution is right in front of me. I just have to wake up or walk out of it, or something really simple, Yeah.
Taken to its ridiculous ends, this is the New Age concept that nothing is real, but to its more practical ends, this is true to the waking up process. You see, what that has been laid out to you as normal is not so much normal. It's just presented as such, and that, you do live a dream if you just take things for granted.
Yeah, exactly. If you see things, if you take things at face value, that you are in a dream world, and the waking up process is about realizing that is kind of a dream, and that there is a very simple way out of it in many respects. I mean, obviously it's not all simple; it does require some hard work, but the parallel still exists, definitely.
Yeah. I would say it presents the waking up process, all that being alive, things like that. Interesting, good concepts there. But again, overall, it's really difficult to say what purpose this film might have been playing, what sort of allegiances the filmmakers have, or what sort of agenda they might have in doing this, or what were they just trying to make a teen book which is popular into a movie? Is it something more than that? It's obviously more than that, we think.
Yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah, definitely. We could argue or discuss at least, which sort of, at least where are they trying to place the emphasis in terms of all the different concepts? What are they saying? What are they trying to push here? But I think it's more about just raising awareness to these concepts. About getting people to accept that these concepts exist, that these concepts are going to become more prevalent as we move into the future, and that these things should be talking points, that these things should be discussed, and that these things are all sort of very important factors to consider, in life and in moving into the future. And as I said, getting a younger generation to sort of accept them at least on subconscious level. But that's again countered by the fact that and it's like a more positive way in terms of how the Divergents are presented as being a more preferable character to identify with, in many ways. And I think what they're talking about there is in terms of, as I talked about before, they referenced, they're obviously referencing Hunger Games in this film. They're drawing upon a lot of the ideas film, but also from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World in many ways. And one of the things that Huxley has talked about on a number of occasions in his, I think his 1962 Berkeley speech, most notably, was the fact that there were, various think tanks who had done studies, like social studies on the public, and that what they found over and over again was that approximately 60% thereabouts of the human population were basically instantly receptive to suggestion, in so much as they could be basically hypnotized, and were very, very suggestible very, very easily. It didn't take a lot at all to convince them of something. You then had another maybe 20% thereabouts who, if they're a bit, but if you really, really hammered the ideas home, they would comply. They would agree with you, they would believe you. And then you had a final, say, 15 to 20%, something like that, of people who simply could not be hypnotized and who could not be fooled at all, really.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they could be sort of conned in some way, but they could not be hypnotized. Their brains just didn't work like that. And I think when they talk about the divergence of this film being a very small percentage of the population, a very unique percentage, I think they're kind of drawing on some of those social studies that Huxley was referencing there, in terms of the sort of this marginal element of the population who don't fit into any particular category, who can't be immediately hypnotized, who are sort of free thinkers, the sort of rebellious, they're very, very individualistic.
Yeah. And in this film, they kind of depict a divergent group as being really small, like 1% or something. And you have to wonder if that's sort of like fear-based thing by the corrupt system, in that they want the divergents to think that they're a tiny minority that can't do anything, when the reality is there's a lot more divergence than just 1%. It's at least like, Huxley's 15, 20%, maybe even more. I mean, for me personally, I feel like this divergent, fully rounded human being is the normal. That should be what's normal for the human being. For me personally, so this whole percentages of like this percent, it's true, I'm sure, in terms of the study Huxley's saying of hypnotism and all that. But at the same time, I mean, what are we really? We're more,
yeah. Well, I think when he's talking about those larger demographics, the majority who were instantly hypnotizable, I think he's talking. I think what he's referring to there is people who have basically succumbed to many years of psychological conditioning, and that had they not been subject to that, they would be the same as the other. This marginal 20%. And I think there's a possibility, of that being the case there, where perhaps, human beings might be much more of us like Divergent, so to speak, to use that term, had we not been so conditioned for so long.
What's an interesting side note here is that it's hypnotism specifically is what that Huxley thing is all about. And hypnotism is a natural human inclination. However, the use of hypnotism as mesmerism to acquire a desired effect in the target, I guess you'd say, the person who's being hypnotized, is, sort of a twisting of something that's natural to the human being, because the trance state can be induced by staring at a campfire, let's say. You go into a hypnotic state by staring at a campfire. It doesn't mean that you have somebody whispering in your ear to overthrow the government and make sure a technocracy comes. It's you staring at the campfire, and you're like thinking possibly in a different state of mind where you're able to think things out in a better way, because you're in that state of mind, and the fire brings it on. But somewhere along the way, human beings have sort of used that natural hypnotic process to their own ends, to darker ends.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and I think the sort of experience you're talking about there perhaps would be, I don't know, I might term that as something more akin to meditation of some form, more of a sort of a different state of consciousness, or where you're in a state of clarity. Whereas, I think those types of techniques or effects or scenarios can perhaps be used, to take that into a more extreme version of itself, where it's no longer a case of being in a state of clarity and meditation, but of being, instantly suggestible, and very, very easy to control and manipulate, I think.
Yeah, and that's where the technocracy ekes its way in and tries to take advantage of things. And I guess on today's show here, Adam, we've given listeners a little taste of what might be to come in future episodes, as we sort of mentioned in the beginning, didn't we?
Yeah. I mean, I think we didn't actually talk about the film that much in this particular episode, but I think that's because this film it's over 2 hours long, and it's pure action all the way through, pretty much, and it would take forever to go through the plot and explain all the different plot sequences and what happens and why this happens. But we gave a brief, a basic, plot summary there, and I think that's all that matters, because what's really interesting and relevant are these. Some of these sort of occult themes that are coming through in terms of the initiations and all the symbols and the elements, and also the sort of political ideologies of the sort of technocratic conquest, and how that parallels the system we're living in today, and the type of society we're moving in tomorrow, along with all the ideas about, we're getting into even gender roles and how those ideas are coming into these types of films, and how it's not just about this film, but about so many other films. And although I can only think of Divergent, The Hunger Games, and Twilight, but I'm sure that I've seen a lot of other films that are very, very similar to this, where it's like a teen novel trilogy that's been turned into a film, or it is planned to be turned into a film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very prevalent memes here.
Yeah, so plenty of material for the future. I want to thank listeners for listening today to Themes and Memes. Do you have anything else to let the audience know, Adam?
Not that I can think of right now. I mean, as I said, there's always going to be things I forget and remember later on. But I'd probably recommend people to see this film. It's worth seeing. There's a lot of interesting ideas worth pondering. I don't think we've covered all of them tonight, because the movie again is very densely packed with a lot of these ideas, and all the initiation stuff we see. There's so much of that. It's going on pretty much throughout the half of the film. But yeah, interesting ideas, and I think perhaps in the future at some point we'll dedicate an episode to just talking about the most prevalent themes and memes, or at least certain themes and memes that are very, very prevalent in a lot of the films that we have reviewed, and even some that we perhaps haven't reviewed. I think next we're doing Lucy next time around.
Yeah, that's the plan.
It's possible, yeah. So people can watch out for that, because that's a very, very different film, but there are a lot of parallels in that one there, especially in terms of gender roles and the stuff we were talking about earlier on. So that's I find that stuff very fascinating, and I'm looking forward to that one. So yeah, stay tuned, listeners, because that one's going to be an interesting one.
Absolutely. Well, it's great to be with you again here today, Adam. And again, thank you to listeners.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. This interview was recorded on September the 19th, 2014.